We were going on a hike. There's this spooky abandoned train tunnel in my state where a bunch of people died 100 years ago, so now it's haunted. Allegedly. Brought one friend with me on the hike since it was a long one. The area and scenery were beautiful, but the tunnel itself was something else. My buddy, let's just call him Ed, was a bit more nervous than me and didn't want to go too far in. I wanted to go as far as I could, which turned out not to be far because the tunnel was blocked by impassable debris. But wait! There was a small hole on the side of the debris mound and it turns out I could crawl through, so I asked, "Hey, Ed, you feel like crawling?" "Nah, dude, no thanks." So, I took up my pack and coat and squirmed through. On the other side was the rest of the tunnel, but with water that went up to nearly the top of the mound on the other side, as far as the eye could see. Dang! I would have to swim in ice, cold, nasty water for who knows how long to keep exploring. Nah, so I decided to crawl back. My buddy Ed was nervous, but we weren't done yet. Next, we busted out just one tool for detecting ghosts, an EMF reader. As someone who is pretty scientific, I tested it multiple times and made sure that it was working before bringing it. We decided to try and contact ghosts in the tunnel. I was pretty confident nothing would happen. We turned off all our electronics and lights, so it was pitch black with just the EMF reader on. I asked pretty basic questions to the ghost. Asked it to come in front of my scanner so I'd know it was there, etc. We did this for a while. Nada. No reading, no surprise, so we headed back. Decided to keep my EMF reader on, and then as we were walking back, suddenly it goes to two lights. Thought maybe our flashlights were causing it, so we turned them off. Nope, still two lights. Reset the device, two solid lights. I think something's here, dude. My adrenaline started flowing into my body now, yet I was still skeptical. I started asking it questions again, and then my EMF signal got even stronger, and we both were getting chills, and the hairs on our skin were standing up. Around this time, we heard something, kinda sounded like a distant cough, but it was so fast it was easy to dismiss. I reset the device again, still getting a strong signal from something, and it's not coming from us. I then said, "Is it alright if we stay in the tunnel with you a bit longer?" Meter instantly went back to 0. Surprised but confident now, I asked, "Do you want us to leave?" Then it instantly went back up to high. Okay, I was pretty convinced at this point. We headed for the entrance to the tunnel and discussed our experience. However, when we were at the entrance, we noticed that the EMF was picking up another signal, just above and to the side of us now. But if you pointed it in a different direction, there was nothing. We left after that, but we think the ghost may have been hanging out by the entrance, waiting for us to leave. You could always say that the EMF was faulty or picking up something else, but I'm sure that device was working. I tested it so many times, before and after, and there was nothing on us producing EMF. Also, considering that we didn't get any reading in there for the vast majority of the time we were there. Truly mind boggling and still processing it. I've always been lonely. Maintaining relationships felt like a chore, trying to force a smile and pantomime along with the usual script. So one day I decided I'd make my own friend, Casper. I always envied little kids who have their imaginary friends and decided to get my own in my mid-teens. I didn't make up a lot about Casper. I always imagined a lonely boy, quiet and good-natured, there to listen, invisible to the world. It was absurd and humiliating that I made up an imaginary friend, so I'd mostly joke around about him when I was with others. But when I was alone, I'd drop to my knees and pour out my heart to an empty room, telling my problems, my hopes, my dreams, how much I hated myself as a person. This summer I had headed down the deep south, the lower border of Mississippi and Louisiana. I go down there for a change of scenery and give myself a mental health vacation. But things were bad when I got down there. I never stayed at one house for more than a day and learned to keep everything I needed in my backpack. I was tossed around from house to house, my backpack and I staying together, and I was ping-ponged around. One weekend I stayed at my cousin's house. We were only 2 days, apparently in age, and shared of the same interests. We spent the night running around with fake katanas and watching anime. My cousin has a terrible fear of the concept of other entities, so as we lay in bed together getting ready to turn off the light, I told him that there's nothing to worry about. My best friend Casper was there. She seemed a little creepy, but he's fiercely loyal to those he loves and protect us from any harm. I pointed right next to the bed and smiled, saying, "Good night, Casper." Turned out the light and that was it. The next day we got up early. We were going to meet up with my cousin's co-workers to go to a haunted historical site, Myrtle Mansion in Louisiana. All packed and ready to leave, I took one long look at my backpack and decided to leave it behind. It had everything I owned and I loved it, but it would just be unnecessary weight. So I dropped it on my cousin's bed, right on the foot of the bed. Both of us remember me putting it there. We head out to meeting our group at the restaurant. They all worked a few miles into town. We all headed to the back, started and hopped into their truck. Sitting in the back, I feel something at my feet and look down to see a backpack, but it looked just like mine. I slowly reached down and unzipped it. It was my backpack. I'd never been in this truck in my life. They didn't even know my name, much less where I was staying. My cousin and I both confirmed when I left my backpack in the house in the bedroom. Yet, somehow, a 20-pound backpack magically appeared. I was shook. My imaginary world had just bled into the real world. I stared at that backpack for the whole 2-hour car ride. When we arrived, I questioned everybody. They knew nothing, not even that I had a bag in the first place. I looked at my cousin and then around me as the tourists bustled around us. Then I got a text from an old friend who I hadn't talked to a while and who was a Wicca. Randomly, out of the blue, at that exact moment, they texted me asking me how I was doing. I looked up and out loud thanked Casper before going on into the restaurant to enjoy my day, hugging my backpack. I'm looking for some answers to what happened to me when I was around 12, 13 years old. I'm 23 now, and these events still loom over me. So, at that time, I was living in Virginia with my parents and two step siblings. We had recently moved into a newly built townhouse development. Our townhouse had 3 floors in total. The upstairs area is where the bedrooms were located. The living room and the kitchen were on the main floor, and the basement was my sister's bedroom. At the time, I was becoming increasingly interested in the paranormal. I would watch all sorts of ghost stories on television. Eventually, I learned what a Ouija board was. I wanted one, but I knew I wouldn't have the means to buy a real one myself, and I knew my parents wouldn't approve, so I opted to make my own. I created a template on a piece of cardboard, carefully replicating what a real one would look like. For the planchette, I used a plastic square-shaped lid that was the perfect size. I heard it wasn't safe to use it by myself, and I didn't have any friends in the area at that time, so I asked my sister if she would try it with me. She was reluctant at first, but after some convincing, she was game. Her uncle had passed maybe a few months prior, so we decided to try and contact him. We set the board up in the basement, her bedroom, with a picture of her uncle next to us. We both lightly put our fingers on the makeshift planchette, and I began to ask questions like, "Uncle, are you here with us tonight?" To both of our surprise, it did not take long to get a response. The planchette moved to yes with a force. At first, I assumed that my sister was messing with me, but soon I would be proved wrong because she started crying very hard. After a few more questions with responses, my sister informed me that she wanted to stop. I don't remember what else we asked because it was so long ago, but I do remember that the planchette would move with haste after every question we asked. We ended by informing her uncle that we were leaving and moving the piece to goodbye. Afterwards, it took some time for my sister to calm down, and I was pretty blown away myself. Strange things started happening to me almost immediately after. After we had finished using the board, we both went upstairs to calm down and watch TV. 30 minutes later, I heard a bang come from the basement. I went downstairs to investigate and found that the planchette had moved from goodbye to no, and a picture on the wall had fallen down. This disturbed me, so afterwards I opted to tear up the board and throw it away. After I did this, I assumed that was the end of it, and for my sister it was. But I didn't know that this was the beginning of months of pure terror for me. I don't know why, but whatever this thing was, it was attached to me. My sister didn't have any odd occurrences afterwards. Meanwhile, I started noticing strange things happening. It started small at first. I noticed our family dog would all of a sudden refuse to come into the bedroom. I would pick him up and take him into my room anyways, but when he was in there, he would act very strange. His ears would stick straight up, and his eyes would fixate on a certain corner in my room. He would whine and bark, and occasionally his head would dart around like he was watching something move around. Then, I was sitting in my room another day on my own. I was watching TV and laughing at the show I was watching. My school binders were sitting all the way at the foot of my bed, and I was sitting at the head of the bed a good distance away. One of my binders slid all the way across my bed, hitting me in the arm. This freaked me out, and I informed my parents that they told me that I was just imagining things. Weird things like this kept happening to me. One time I walked into the kitchen during the day by myself, and a sponge that was sitting on the dining room table suddenly flew across the whole room with force. I continued to experience things like this, and they started becoming more frequent. I talked to my sister about it, and she told me that nothing odd was happening for her. I was a mess at the time. I did not want to go home and would often try to go to a friend's house after school instead, which most of the time didn't work out. I talked to my parents again, and go figure, they thought I was making it up for the tension again. After a little bit of going through it, I had the most terrifying night of my life. This event still sends shivers down my spine when I think of it. It traumatized me, and although I've worked past it for the most part, I still try not to think about it. I've only told a few people in my life about this because it sounds like a straight up lie. This night was the climax of my experiences. After this happened, the activity completely stopped. One night I was laying in my bed. It was about 2 or 3 in the morning, and I couldn't sleep, so I was just laying there. My whole family was asleep, and the house was completely dark. I slept with my door open at the time, and the only light source was a blue light emanating from my radio in my room. It was just bright enough to illuminate my room. I had my blanket over my head covering half of my face, but I could still see my room from waist height down to the floor. To my horror, as I lay there with my eyes open, a black figure entered my field of vision near the foot of my bed. It was right next to my bed. There was no color on whatever this was. It was a pure pitch black with no obvious features. I was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't scream or move. I just lay there as I watched this thing slowly move down my bed until it stopped right in front of my face. I then felt a hand placed on my head through the blanket that was over me. The hand rested there for a second and then began moving in a circular motion for a few seconds. Eventually the hand lifted and I watched the dark figure slowly move away and then out of the room. This was the last thing that ever happened. After that, it just completely stopped as fast as it started. This whole ordeal has had a huge impact on my life. This is the first time I am sharing this story online. I haven't tried until now because I did not want to type it out and relive it. But now I'm more curious as to what the fuck happened to me and what that thing was. I think that I should also add that aside from anxiety and depression issues, I am mentally sound. I've never experienced hallucinations or delusions, and I know what happened to me was real. This really happened. Take my word for it, if you wish. If not, that's fine too. As far back as I can remember, I've always enjoyed learning about history, and including military history. As an early teen, my dad got me a copy of Time Life's The Civil War, Gettysburg. I looked through it and read it constantly. I was particularly drawn to a photo of a deceased soldier pictured at Devil's Den. I never forgot it. Fast forward about 20 years. My wife and I decide to finally visit Gettysburg on Halloween for our wedding anniversary. My first stop had to be Devil's Den. The Gettysburg Military Park has tons of one-way little roads. The road towards Devil's Den had a few. We missed a turn or something and we got lost. It was approaching evening, but not dark. It was overcast with a little drizzle, and my wife and I were hungry, so we decided to come back tomorrow. Driving back into town, I pulled up to a deserted road and was also a four-way stop. This is where we saw it. Sitting at the stop sign, I automatically looked to make sure it was clear to drive off. As I was about to pull away, I saw something to my left that was probably close enough to reach out and touch. There, floating mid-air about torso height, was what looked like a cotton button shirt that I believe was dark grey. It was torn to pieces and fluttering violently as though hurricane winds were blowing. I don't remember sounds or smells. There was no blood, and I don't recall seeing any body parts, just this shirt. My brain didn't, or rather couldn't, register what it was seeing. I looked at this apparition for about 10 seconds and drove off. A moment after that, I turned to my wife without saying a word, and she was smiling at me and asked, "Did you see it?" Every word of this is true, and the event happened. There's no mistaking what my wife and I saw for anything other than what it was. Every night, when I settle in for bed, almost without fail, it feels like someone else comes and lays down next to me. At first, it feels like a cat jumps up, like they do when they want to join up in a cuddle pile. Thing is, I do not own a cat. A short while later, I'll feel the bed shift like it would when an SO comes to bed themselves. This is long before I fall asleep or even get close to it. I usually watch an episode or two of something to settle my mind before sleeping. This usually happens within the first few minutes once I'm settled in. There's no strange feelings or cold chills, nor the pressure in the chest that comes with sleep paralysis. I'm trying to remain a skeptic about this, but I swear I can feel the bed shifting with the weight of someone who isn't there. Once I swear I got bopped in the face by something. I've tried Google, but all I got were more people asking about this, so I know I'm not the only one. Is there a name for this phenomenon? Is it a normal part of sleep? It's far from disruptive in my life, but it's piqued my interest in a very Fox Mulder kind of way. It might also be worth noting that I worked a night shift, so I end up sleeping most often during the day. It doesn't matter what hour I go to lay down to sleep, it always happens. The very first time I ever saw these things, I was around 6 or 7 years old. My family was camping at some lake in Oklahoma, and I saw two strange figures. I was standing outside our camper alone, and I saw a ghostly white figure. It looked like a preteen girl with long hair and a gown running into the woods, chased by a tall, thin, black figure. I froze and called for my dad, who went into the woods where I saw these, but he saw no footprints or anything. I moved to a rural property in 2015, and it's definitely my home. It's my home. In January of 2016, aged 11, I was standing outside and just kind of staring out at the trees on the property. For a solid 3 seconds, I made eye contact with this abnormally tall, emaciated, pitch black humanoid. I used quotations around eye contact, seeing as it had no eyes. It was hanging upside down by its knees from a tree branch. Its long arms were touching the ground. If I had to guess, I'd say it was around 7 to 10 feet tall. I felt a deep sense of dread and ran inside to tell my father. When we came back out a few seconds later, it was gone. I hadn't started seeing them again until recently, starting in September. On September 28, my girlfriend, brother, and I were down the road from my house trying to catch fish at a bridge. I got bored and uncomfy because there were gnats, so I started walking up the road back to my house. I was about halfway there when I saw the figure standing in the centre of the road. I froze, it froze, and we stood there for about a minute or two. It was around 9 foot tall, and its hands nearly touched the ground. I ran back down to the bridge and waited to walk back home with my brother and my girlfriend. I didn't speak for a solid 2 hours. 2 days ago, I was closing the blinds to a window my cat enjoys perching at, and one was straight outside the window. It had its face inches from the glass, and it opened its mouth. I don't know why this one had a mouth, but in its mouth was a big bulging eye. It freaked me out, and I curled up in my bed. Today, I saw it peeking around a corner in my living room. I'm terrified. Does anyone know anything about this? I live in Pennsylvania, and there's this creepy house called Ray Mayer's Hollow, where a murder took place in 1928. I'll post a Wikipedia page if you want to read up on it. On one afternoon, I was hanging out with 2 of my friends, and we pretty much weren't doing anything. This was like 4 years ago when we were bored teenagers. So I mentioned checking out that house, and they never heard about it, so once they heard the backstory about it, they were down to visit it. When we got there, it was pretty light out still. It was about an hour away from us. We looked around, and imaging everywhere and everything took place, just talking about the history of it. If you're from Pennsylvania and know this place, you know they upped security over the years. So we were being respectful and just admiring the property. Once we decided to leave, my friend backed out and went the wrong way. He ended up coming to a dead end and had to back up into someone's driveway. I was in the back seat and had my head looking out the back window to make sure he was all good, and out of nowhere, I saw this woman, long black hair, piercing black eyes, and a white dress, staring at me and keeping eye contact in the doorway of this house. I turned around, freaking out, with tears in my eyes. I looked back and there was no one there. I had to look away for only 2 seconds. My friend who was backing up told me he didn't see anything. My other friend was looking down at his phone, so he clearly didn't see anything. I somehow was the only one who witnessed her. I've never felt fear like that before. The way she was looking at me will never leave my mind. I don't know if I just saw a creepy woman or if I saw something paranormal. Whatever it was, it still haunts me to this day, after years. Growing up, we didn't have much. My mother tried her best to feed three kids with no money. When I got older and when she got sick and couldn't afford the medical bills, I had a choice to make. I felt like it was my responsibility as the eldest to take care of her and after she worked so hard for us. I started to work as a bouncer in a strip club that was connected to a local gang due to being unable to land any other job. I've seen my fair share of illegal activities, however, stayed out of it for the most part. My mother started to get sicker, and I got on the verge of asking around about any other kind of jobs to do, the more illegal ones. Then I learned I could earn some fast cash when I found out about the loan system. Oddly enough, the crime network of our large city offered loans. You had the option of applying for 2 grand, 5 grand, or 10 grand. However, you can ask for more, but those aren't given out often. The 10 grand plus my savings would cover the medical costs, and I quickly found out where I could apply. The application processes had all the normal questions, but more personal ones added in. In order to even be considered, you must list things such as your favorite food or date idea. The questions threw me for a loop at first, but I filled them all out regardless. They also take photos of your face at different angles and body measurements. When all the questions are answered and photos on file, they decided in a few days if you're worthy for the loan or not. If you are accepted, it's not as simple as just paying it back at the high interest rates. In fact, they don't even care about the money. Accepting the loan system means putting your body as collateral. If you are able to pay off the loan, you're in the clear. If you still owe money, even by a few dollars, they still have the right to take you. At any point while you still owe money, you could disappear, never to be seen again. People disappearing because of the loans didn't happen very often, and there were so many rumors on who was behind all of this and why. Surely there's an easier way to traffic people, so no one ever guessed the true nature behind the loans. I didn't care about myself, I just wanted to take care of my mother. With bills paid off and her on the mend, I started taking extra shifts to pay back what I owed. I got along well with some of the girls that worked at the strip club. I walked into the cars if needed and sometimes got them home safe by the end of the night if they had no other options. When Candy asked me to guide her along the parking lot, I didn't question it. I should have noticed how she acted and that it was still in the middle of her shift. I just assumed she wasn't feeling well and wanted to head home for the night. I kept my eye on two men lurking near a set of cars in the dark. When they started to move, I quickly placed a hand on her small waist to guide her back to the club. More men I didn't see before came out, guns raised. I shielded her with my body, regretting I didn't carry a gun. "Only you," one spoke, motioning with a weapon for me to stand aside. "I'm so sorry," Candy whispered, distraught. I clued in these men were collecting for the loan system. They wanted nothing to do with her and asked Candy to lure me out into the dark. I gave her a reassuring smile. I didn't blame her for her part in this. I was only glad she was fine and they weren't going to hurt her. I refused to move until she was safe back inside the club. Rough hands dragged me over to a car. With a gun at my back, I didn't fight the blindfold coming over my eyes. They could have more than one weapon, and I didn't like the idea of getting hit with a stun gun. I was outnumbered and good as dead if I resisted. That was what I signed up for when I took the loan. I knew the risk, but still was terrified over what was going to happen to me. At the very least, I did what I wanted and I took care of my mother. With my hands bound behind my back, I got shoved inside the car for a long ride. They put on some low music from a mixtape of random songs from different yearly top 10 lists. The never-ending list of songs made it hard to keep track of how many ended and how long we drove for. When we finally parked, it was not to drop me off, but rather grab another person. I waited in silent cars while two men sitting on either side. They were smart enough not to leave me alone. Soon another person was jammed in the back seat of the van. He was sobbing and begging not to be taken. Anything he could think of to get away, he tried it. From kicking at the seats and windows and until they grabbed a hold of him to throwing out offers for their captors to spare him. When nothing worked, he settled into a heavily crying fit. I really didn't think of him any less of a person for this reaction. It should be a normal response for this kind of situation. At some point, I'd carefully got the blindfold loose and he got his off without the other men caring. After he had no more tears left, he noticed me. With me being so calm, he assumed I was with the kidnappers at first. "How are you not fighting this?" he whispered over it, a bit too loud. "I've done what I wanted to do in life. This is fine," I replied, trying to hold back my emotions. I didn't want to die, but there wasn't much for me to stick around for. Shifting my head slightly, I knew the other man sat beside me, but didn't know who else was inside the van. Inside was far too dark to really see clearly with half my blindfold over my eyes. "I'll do what I can for you," I whispered, hoping only he heard. It wasn't right someone like him got caught up in all of this. If I could get him free, I would try my best, but no one reacted to my statement because they thought I didn't have any power to help. When the van stopped, we were guided out, the man trying to struggle again as I just walked on, slightly shaking my legs. The blindfold stayed on, the men adjusting it back over my eyes the moment we were out of the van. With some issues, they got me up a flight of stone steps that echoed as we walked. I heard that they ended up having to carry the other man, kicking and screaming. Finally, we were led to a room and told to get on our knees. The blindfolds came off and I looked around to see where we were brought. A line of heavily armed men stood in the back of the dark room in front of the doors, making it impossible to escape. On each side of myself was a person on their knees with their hands tied behind their backs. 3 women and 3 men, including myself. The one from the van started sobbing again, the others looking too scared to do so. The other side of the room, so dark we couldn't see anything beyond a certain point, but we heard it. Something walked closer, something large. Heavy steps came from the dark with deep breaths. A wispy laughter came, the sound making my body feel like ice. My heart overworked itself as my mind thought of countless ideas of what could be coming towards us. I was the only one who stayed on my knees. Some tried to get up and run, but the armed men came over and forced them in one spot again. Sobbing came from the others as the thing got closer until I thought I saw a vague outline of a great beast pacing in the dark. I blinked, then a man replaced the image of the massive monster in the dark. He looked fairly handsome, but in a fake sort of way, with neatly styled black hair. Grey eyes looked us over and he smiled, a mouth with teeth looking too sharp, looking over the six terrifying kidnapped prey. What a nice assortment this time around. It's a shame I can only pick one tonight, the man said in a voice so endearing it made me ill. The others quickly found hope, begging to be either let go or for him to pick someone else, saying how better looking the girls were than themselves, the men pleading for one of the girls to be taken, and that caused the three women to turn on them. Not even the armed men could keep them silent. Soon they added into the noise, making the room fill with a verbal chaos. The man staring at us with eyes of a hunter was pleased by the outcome. Take me, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Everyone shut up, shocked by the offer. The man with the grey eyes hid a smile behind the back of his hand. Taking one step closer, I saw he was doing his best to clean spots of drool from the corners of his mouth. I felt scared to death. Whatever he wanted to do wasn't going to be natural. I still didn't regret speaking up. I kept my gaze on the ground, unable to watch the man get closer, and I heard his polished shoes tap on the cold floor right in front of myself. I stared at the reflective leather until he got down on his knees, dress pants creasing, his head ducking low to catch my line of sight. His smile so wide it shouldn't be possible. Teeth pointed, and for a second I thought I was looking at a creature's face, something between a wolf and a rat. Grabbing the side of my face, he lifted my head up so he could look down on me while he sat on his knees. Both hands tugged at my short hair, forcing my head up. His eyes no longer a grey, but almost glowing silver. Now, you are an interesting one. I would be glad to eat you all up. His voice dripping with excitement. For a moment I thought he was going to press his mouth filled with pointed teeth over my own, but he stopped himself. Pulling back, he forced us to keep eye contact. Say it again. Say that you'll give yourself over. Not just your life, but everything you are. If you do that, I won't touch any of the people in this room. His voice sweet, making my skin crawl. I wanted to refuse him, my stomach twisting and body trembling. I would rather die instead of whatever he had planned. At first I felt so scared I nearly refused. As I stared into his silver eyes, something strange happened. Everything else around his disappeared. All that remained was that deep silver color. My mind unable to focus on anything else as my fears eased. The longer I stared into his eyes, the more I understood about him. He was ancient, countless years old, older than our world. He came from somewhere else, a place humans would never understand. And he'd gotten bored. Taking a person to completely twist their mind, the closest thing to entertainment he could find. His face got closer to my own, and I felt myself changing against my will. To my horror, I wanted him to take me, to eat me down to the bone. As much as I resisted him, the more he mentally pulled. I would be killed, but he promised it would be a better experience than any human should ever be able to have. A single word pulled me from the trace and broke whatever power the man held over me. I pulled back, breathing hard, nearly getting sick as he let go. One of the armed men was disgusted seeing two men looking at each other in such a way. He muttered a very rude insult under his breath, unaware that everyone in the room could hear him. A dark expression came across the man's face for a second. He leaned over, his mouth right beside my ear. Maybe next time. His words caused the back of my neck to prickle. In a blink of an eye, the space in front of me was empty. Startled voices came next. I turned my head to see what was going on. Everyone who'd been kidnapped suddenly free. Each of their binds mysteriously snapping at the same time. Some tried for the door as the armed men froze in shock from what they were seeing. The man who wanted to devour me took a hold of the one who insulted him. Whispering something that made his prey turn pale, the monster's terrible face bright with joy. Mouth impossibly wide, he brought it down on the tender, exposed neck to rip part of it away. People screamed and fled. I was the only one who stayed to watch. The black-haired man's body twisted and turned into something so removed from logic my brain refused to fully process it. A silver creature with a long, powerful snout that ripped into his victim's stomach. Somehow the man remained alive, blood pouring from his mouth as he watched his own organs being torn and eaten. Instead of looking to be in pain, the man looked as if he greatly enjoyed it. My head felt light watching that man's expression, whole being torn apart. This creature was making his meal enjoy the pain and his death. This very nearly happened to myself, and a flood of emotions came with that fact. I watched the gory scene, a terrible feeling came bubbling up. I felt a little jealous, and that made me sick. A pair of hands pulled me from the ground and out the door. I assumed it was the crying man from the van coming back to get me. We all spilled outside, frantic and mentally scarred from the night. Getting home was just a blur. I thought the other guy meekly thanked me for offering myself, but I wasn't certain. All I could think about how close I'd been to death that night and the terror that came from how I truly felt about it. Weeks passed as I fell back into my regular life. I pretended as if the dark urge plaguing my brain wasn't there, that I made it out safe. I was fine and wasn't in any danger. I went to pay down my loan only to find out the ones taken out as a choice to be eaten had their loans cleared in exchange for their silence. I no longer had the threat of being snatched up at any point or had any reason to ever come across that creature again. If it was anyone else, they would be happy about it. That night tainted my mind in a way I couldn't fight. I finally broke and took out another loan. Already being in the system made the process faster. The ones in the office I went to weren't even surprised. I doubted I was the first person to do this. Now it's just a waiting game. Every moment torture as I thought about seeing that creature again to be ripped apart. At any time, someone would come for me. Until then, I took care of my mother and spent time with my family. I never told them how death hovered over my every waking second or how I felt about it. Just to make some pleasant memories with my family before I disappear forever. I honestly hope they never find out about what I saw that night and how it changed me. And if anyone hears about the loan system, then maybe they'll think twice about signing up. There is something worse than death, something like living with the fear of dying and yet being unable to control yourself, eagerly going towards it. Back in the long forgotten year of 1988, I was 13, spending my first time going on an overnight camping trip. Back in those days, there was limited options for entertainment. My parents were going to go crazy with me running around the house for the entire summer. They put together some money to send me away for a trip to the lake for 3 days. I packed my bags right away, feeling excited. I was finally being trusted going somewhere overnight without my parents. The group was made of 6 boys, all around the same age, with 2 adults as supervisors. They held 3-day camping trips every weekend in the summer and normally had a bigger turnout. For whatever reason, we had a smaller group, which was fine by the 2 adults taking care of us. Herding 6 barely teenage boys around the woods was a hard enough job. The day went smooth despite our bursts of energy threatening to sabotage the trip. We each got into pairs as a tent buddy. We needed to set up our tents on our own, and mostly on our own. Kevin was my tent buddy. We started off strong setting up, but needed help putting the last few poles into the packed dirt. I knew Kevin from school, but wasn't in the same class as him. He was a shy boy, and still we got along just fine. The other boys started to tease him because Kevin was the youngest yet and the biggest boy of us all. In that moment, I decided to defend him during the weekend, and we kept working away at the tent, ignoring the other boys until they lost interest. Proud of our work setting up our tent, we treated each other to treats we stashed away in our bags. After lunch was finished and cleaned up, the groups went down to the lake to swim. Hours went by. All 6 of us started to get along, and by the time we needed to return to camp for dinner, we were all so exhausted we let the adult supervision teach us important facts along the way. Things like what poison ivy looks like and how to know if some wild animals are in the area. Stuff that we should know, but was always good to be reminded even if summer wasn't for learning. Drew wanted us to roast hot dogs for our dinner. He was finding it difficult to light a fire and used a flint kit. He wanted to teach us a new skill. After a few minutes of a pack of hungry boys complaining, he gave up digging out a lighter instead. Stacy was our other supervisor. She was a pretty girl, only about 20. When you're 13, that seems pretty old. Her nails painted cute colors, and us boys loved. She didn't seem to be the outdoors type of girl. Drew might have needed help keeping all the girls in check and all the boys, and called in some backup. Drew was a youth pastor, and the church ran the camping trips. Even so, he did not make us say grace before eating or even have any religious activities planned for us. He let us stuff ourselves, and when darkness came, we told some scary stories around the fire. It was only 9 p.m. when he made all of us go to bed, but from the active day, our little bodies felt like it was much later. Each of us went to our tents with almost no complaints about bedtime. I'd fallen asleep very easily. Only an hour passed before Kevin woke me up by seriously and nervously shuffling in his sleeping bag. "Are you all right?" I asked him in a low whisper. "Sorry, did I wake you up?" he replied back in the dark. "Nah," I lied. I wondered if he needed to go to the washroom. A porta-potty was set up pretty close by. "Do you need to go pee?" I asked him. I couldn't see his face in the dark. I rustled around looking for my flashlight. I I didn't need to go out, but I didn't mind walking down with him if he was scared. Yeah, do. Do you think that story Drew told had any truth in it? He asked sheepishly. The smiling man in the woods? Nah, he's just making stuff up. If the woods were dangerous, our parents wouldn't let us go. I heard his head move against his sleeping bag, nodding at my words. Turning out the light, I helped him out of the tent for a quick pee run. Some giggling came from the tent beside us. John and Bobby talked non-stop all day. They might chat all night if someone didn't stop them. I was tempted to jump at their tent to scare them, but left it alone. They would regret staying up all night tomorrow morning. And I didn't want to get in trouble for pulling a prank. Kevin was still scared. I took his hand and held the flashlight in the other. I even stood guard outside the porta-potty while he took care of his business, just in case. Kevin had older siblings, but I didn't. He seemed lonely and homesick already. I was trying my best to act like an older brother to comfort him. In the brush, I thought I saw yellow eyes flicker looking at me. Shining the flashlight in the direction of the eyes, I saw nothing. Just forest animals wondering what we were doing. I was a little scared of coming across a bear or something along those lines. Ghost stories or crazy serial killers in the woods didn't scare me in that moment. The forest sounded like how a forest should at night. Spooky trees creaking and all. Just as Kevin came out, ready to head back, a scream cutting through the night made us freeze in fear. It came from the direction of the camp. The low fire gave us just enough light to sort of make out the tents and a dark figure stalking around our campsite. Watching in horror, the figure went over to Drew's tent, ripped it open and dragged Stacy out by the leg. I grabbed Kevin, holding him close to me, terrified at what was going on. Stacy fought the figure with everything she had. She thrashed and tossed anything within arm's reach towards the figure's face. Drew came out of the tent, tackling the person or thing off her. Stacy got up and ran. At first I thought she left everyone behind. Instead, she found the axe for firewood, using it on her attacker. It was too much for me. I turned my head away, body shaking, unable to keep watching the horrible sight. Kevin was crying as we held each other, waiting for an adult to come and tell us everything was all right. We had only been gone for a few minutes, and how did everything go wrong so fast? We both screamed when we heard footsteps come close a few minutes later. Opening my eyes, I saw it was Stacy, black staining her shirt. She smelled like 10-day-old rotting fish, and it made me gag. In her hand was the axe covered with more of that rancid-smelling black liquid. Bobby and John beside her, holding each other while crying and shaking like me and Kevin. Come on, if we follow the trail, we'd hit Mr. Bobby's farmhouse. He has a phone, Stacy said, trying to sound strong, but her voice came out weak and shaking. Where's Mr. Drew and Nina? And I started to say the other names of our missing campmates, but my throat closed up and only a sob came out. I knew what happened to them. I just couldn't say it. They're gone. Come on. Using her free arms, Stacy scooped it behind us to get us to start walking down the trail as fast as our small legs would carry us. Once we started walking, Stacy kept both hands on the axe, and I was in front, both hands on the flashlight, guiding our way as Kevin kept his arms around my waist. Bobby and John still sobbed behind us, no matter how hard they tried to choke it down. My hands shook. Every sound made me think something was just beyond the trees, waiting to jump out and take us. My eyes darted around, trying to see everything at once, making me dizzy. The farmhouse was a half an hour walk away at the best of times. Drew's car was closer, and I wondered why Stacy wasn't leading us there. I assumed Drew had his keys on him when the figure took him, or Stacy didn't want to stay at the camp long enough to find them. When you're so young and scared, you don't think about other escape plans. You only accept what the adult tells you. I got another whiff of the horrible rotten flesh smell when the wind shifted. Gagging and eyes watering, I refused to stop. Minutes passed and the smell decreased enough to make me stop choking on the bile rising in my throat. It was only then I noticed Bobby was the only one still sobbing. Stacy noticed it at the same time. We both turned to look, only seeing this small brown-haired boy and John just gone without a trace. "Run!" Stacy's shout got us moving. She grabbed Bobby, roughly dragging him by her arm, the boy screaming in fear. Kevin was the slowest of us. He was dragging me behind. Still, I kept one arm around him, trying best to get him to go a little bit faster. When another dark shape came out of the trees, directly in front of Stacy, she didn't stop. She let out a startled scream, swinging the axe at the figure's head. I saw the flash of glowing yellow eyes before hearing the awful crack of the axe connecting to its skull. It collapsed to the trail. Stacy wasted no time yanking the blade out that was stuck in the thing's skull. I shone my flashlight, trying to get a better look at the figure. Black blood like oil oozed from the head wound. The face was pitch dark and flat with no nose. Its skin so dark and wet looking. More of that smell came drifting over, causing Kevin to start gagging this time. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. That much I knew. We didn't even have time to guess at what it was before another came out of the trees. Stacy clipped it with her axe, making it scream and dart away. She was breathing hard. If more of these things came at us, I didn't think we would make it. Stacy was only one person, and she had to defend 3 scared boys. Even so, she looked ready to do it. Another creature came at us. Sadly, while Stacy was dealing with the first one, 2 more came. In seconds, they grabbed Bobby, dragging him screaming into the woods. Stacy screamed and cursed at them, pain across her face that she didn't keep the boys safe. More and more of those creatures started to appear and poked their heads from the trees in front of us. She gave us a look. No words, just a look, and I knew what it meant and what to do. She ran towards the monsters, axe in hand, and me and Kevin ran back down the trail towards the camp, knowing we would never get past the wall of pitch-dark monsters. Stacy gave us some time, and we weren't going to waste it. Running hard, Kevin kept up with me, tears pouring down his face. I wanted to cry, but knew if I gave in to that, I wouldn't be able to keep going. Lungs burning, we ran until we saw the orange light of the fire. I planned to get the hot dog pokers or well, anything I could use as a weapon. For half a second, I felt almost safe. Maybe if I found the keys, we could find the car and hide inside if we couldn't drive it. Maybe, just maybe, Stacy would get away and we could all go together. All my hopes were crushed when Kevin stumbled, falling hard. I was running so fast I accidentally left him behind for a few paces before skidding to a stop to go back for him. A dark monster took it as a chance to swoop in, trying to drag him away. I went by Stacy's example. I let out a war cry that would have sounded funny in any other situation. Jumping on the creature's back, I hit it with my flashlight as hard as I could, as many times as I was able, aiming for its head. Our struggling only lasted a few seconds. I was tossed off its back, onto the hard ground. Looking at me with yellow eyes, setting a dark face, it decided we weren't worth it and sulked off. I'd saved us for the moment. I needed to get Kevin up and moving back into the camp and get a better weapon. My stomach turned when I looked at him. A long gash on his stomach was pouring blood onto the ground. I shook my head to clear it, refusing to give up. Grabbing under the arms, I started to drag him back towards camp and towards the dim orange light of the fire. I knew some basic first aid, but already was sure this was far beyond what I could help with. Leaving him behind was not an option just yet. Horrible wound or not, I needed to at least try and help him. I was swearing and panting by the time I got him by the fire. I kept repeating how sorry I was that I needed to drag him and hurting him while doing so. He was very brave and kept his sobs very low for my sake. Digging around in Drew's ruined tent, I started to look for anything of use. Just normal camping gear. No weapons I could see, and no car keys. I grabbed the first aid kit, another flashlight, and some scissors. I was hoping to find a knife of some sort. No such luck. I avoided the other tents. I could smell the blood mixed in with the fishy rot and didn't want to know what horror waited for me inside. I tried cleaning Katie up a little and Kevin up a little, was well over my head. I didn't want to hurt him by touching him so much. Seeing that amount of blood nearly made me sick. I didn't even know of the fact I felt faint seeing blood until that point. I was so stressed I wasn't even aware of someone walking up to our camp until they were just outside the light of the embers. My body jolted into action as I grabbed the scissors in one hand and hot dog stick in the other. The black blood-soaked axe came into view, and for a brief moment I thought Stacy made it back. That was not the case. A man came into the light, dressed in baggy clothing that hung loose on his thin frame. Long, straight white hair was half-heartedly pulled back into a long ponytail, but most of it still stayed in his face, making it hard to see his features. "Who?" I choked. "Two left. Good for you." Ignoring me, he sat down next to the fire pit and started placing wood onto trying to get it going again. I was so shocked at his calm manner I couldn't react. A soft cry from Kevin brought me back to my senses. "I need help. My friend is hurt and there are things in the woods eating everyone. Stacy had that axe. Is she all right? Did you see her? Please, tell me something. No, please help Katie. Please help Kevin first. She's really hurt and I'm so scared. There's a lot of blood and I don't." Once the words started, they just kept coming. They poured from me without any thought of what I was saying. I was having a meltdown. As I kept talking, the man started to stiffen at the sounds just pouring out towards him. He raised a hand to make me stop speaking and the other to his forehead, as if in pain. When I didn't stop pleading, he snapped first. "Stop talking!" His voice was so loud it kept echoing through the woods for a few seconds. I was frozen in fear by the sound and dropped all my makeshift weapons. I'd never had an adult just snap at me like he just did. A tense second passed between use. Rubbing his temple, I saw regret flutter over his face from getting angry with me. It only lasted a second before he regained his tired, worn-out look. I went over to Katie, about ready to burst from stress when he also came over. Then I went to Kevin and he also came over. He held a hand over his wound. I looked in amazement as most of his blood just faded with a wave of his hand and his gash closed a little. Not much, but it looked better than before. "Who? What?" I asked in a very small voice, just in case he would yell again. With a long-suffering sigh, he went back to the fire, turned to me. "I have a migraine. Your friend may last through the night if he's lucky." "What about Stacy? Did you see her?" You don't need to worry about her anymore. His cold tone nearly brought me to tears. I wanted nothing more than to just start crying and shouting, but Kevin still needed me. This man might be able to help us. Breaking down wouldn't help us get out of there. Glancing up, I saw yellow eyes in the dark and I trembled. The creature saw us, head poking out from the trees a few feet away, drool dripping from an open mouth of sharp teeth. When it saw the man next to the fire, its eyes widened in fear and darted back into the woods. "Those monsters are scared of you," I stated after I saw the strange sight. Looking over his shoulder at me, his eyes narrowed. He didn't want to talk, and he didn't want to hear me asking questions. Until I got some answers, one of those things was going to happen. I'm like, their boss. They need to follow certain rules, and they broke the first one. Only 7 of them should be in this area. It was 10, but I cut the number down as a punishment. I've killed the extras, so right now, 7 are in the woods. He explained. He sounded tired for how young he looked under his bleached white hair. I wondered if he was sick or something. The other rule is they can only kill 1 human per night. So, 7 of them can kill 7 humans. So far, they've killed 6. My throat caught again. Gripping Kevin's hands, I hoped it comforted him enough to calm him down after hearing such news. We were the last 2 left in our group. Fear seeped in my bones, making me feel cold, even as the flames started to rise in the fire pit. They can still kill 1 more, right? I asked hoarsely. He didn't reply. He only gave me another look over his shoulder to confirm that fact. Even after it sunk in, I felt a little sense of relief. The monsters wouldn't attack us. I could just stay there or around the man and be safe. Looking back down at Kevin, my hope fluttered away. Unless he could heal him more, there was a very big chance he wouldn't make it through the night. I needed to get to the farmhouse and to a phone for help. "Can you carry him for me? We need to get out of here. He'll die if I don't call someone to help him, and I can't go alone through those woods with those monsters." My voice started out strong, but soon it went back into a begging and pleading tone. "I'm staying here all night. My head is killing me." My eyes darted to the axe, tempted to threaten him with it until he listened. If he could kill those monsters in the woods, I had no choice of getting him to go along with my plan. If I went, I might die before I got help. If I stayed, Kevin might die before sunrise. The world was so unfair at that point. I held his hand so tight it must have hurt my new friend, but he didn't complain. "Stay here with me," Kevin said finally in a weak voice. I looked down at him, really wanting nothing more than to do just that. Staying meant risking his life. I wondered if he was considering that when he asked me. He might have just wanted someone by his side when he was scared and in pain. "Please, can you heal him?" I begged once again. "I've done as much as I can. It's not my job to help humans. I don't care which one of you lives. Only that those creatures don't break that last rule and I'm forced to kill them." "You should kill them all." They killed. I couldn't get the words out. I thought of Stacy and Drew and the girls I spent the day with. They were gone and there was nothing I could do about it aside from hate the ones who murdered them. It's just their nature, although that fact might be impossible for a human to understand. You've been on top of the food chain for so long you think it's a tragedy when one of you dies, when in any other species it's just how life is. My gut stirred while white hot rage. I wanted to attack the man in front of us, whoever he was, I knew giving in to my emotions wouldn't help. I just let myself cry and hold Katie's hand, hoping it felt like he had a sibling with him at that moment. I knew what my decision was and needed to get all the crying out before I followed through on it. You could kill her, you know. That way you would... I didn't let him finish. I tossed whatever was close to me at his head. He raised a hand to deflect the attack, making the scissors fly off into the darkness. I thought he would be angry with me, but he just looked at me with a stunned at my reaction. I'm not killing her. Kevin is a sweet boy who's going to live a long life and do many good things. He's not dying tonight, and I'm making sure of that. Standing up, I went over to the axe, wrapping a hand that could barely fit around the handle. It was heavy for me, but I would need to manage. Rubbing the tears from my eyes, I looked around for the flashlight, ready to leave the farmhouse. Grabbing it, ready to go, the man stopped me by standing in my way. "What's your name?" he asked, and it made me stop and blink. "Savannah," I told him, not knowing why he asked. "I'm Liren. I'll give you a little bit of help." "Earring?" I misheard his name. "No, Leah, never mind. Let me borrow the axe." I pulled it away from him defensively. I didn't want to trust him after he treated us, but didn't have any other options. Letting him take the axe, he held it in one hand. In the other, he ran a fingernail across his thumb, hard enough to make it bleed. Pressing the thumb to the axe handle, the wood faded, turning a solid silver. The black blood disappeared off the weapon until it was a pure and glittering in the dark. When he gave it back to me, I found the now silver axe light enough for my small body to handle. "This is all I can do. You have to fight through this on your own. You may have a weapon now to increase your chances, but don't get cocky out there. And I know this is hard to ask, but please don't kill those monsters if you don't need to. I don't like it when my creatures have senseless deaths. Killing for food is one thing, but..." Gripping the new weapon in one hand, I found it suddenly heavy. Liren, whoever he was, cared about those creatures. He didn't want them to die if he could help it. He must have a rough time being the only one to kill them when they broke their rules. No wonder how he looked so tired and pained. I nodded him and looked over at Kevin. He still hadn't sat up. I wasn't even sure if he was aware of what was going on. If I died and he lived, he would never forgive me for leaving him. I just needed to make it for his sake. Giving them both one last look, I ran off back down the trail, a new flashlight guiding my way. I didn't know where the farmhouse was, but I remembered hearing I just needed to follow the trail out, and I would see it. I used up a lot of my strength running for a few minutes, forcing to pace myself. I slowed down while looking out for yellow eyes in the dark, not feeling safe in the slightest. Shortly, I passed the spot where Stacy made her last stand. Tears threatened to make me stop. I didn't see any traces of her, only the bodies he left behind. Stepping around the bodies' scattered remains, I breathed through my mouth, trying to get over the smell. When I got a few feet away from the area, I heard a crunching noise behind me. Turning and shining my flashlight back, I gasped to see 4 creatures in the middle of the trail. Long fingers snatching up pieces of the fallen and sharp teeth tearing apart the dark flesh. They looked at me but didn't stop eating. If the 4 stayed there, I only had 3 more to worry about somewhere in the woods. Quickening my pace, I went on. Every sound put me on edge, sniffing the air to see if I could smell if any more of those monsters were coming closer to me. 10 minutes passed without any issues. I thought I saw some yellow eyes watching in the woods, but they didn't approach. The silver axe might be keeping them away. After all, they had the bodies of my campmates and their fallen to eat. Why go for someone with a weapon when they had free meals all over the place? I thought I was in the clear when a figure came out of the trees, stopping in front of me. I knew which one this was. It was the bastard that hurt Kevin and the one that smashed my flashlight on. One eye was closed and the other looked at me with such hate. I knew he wanted to eat my guts for the damage I'd done to it before. It bolted towards me before I could move. A clawed arm grabbed my shirt, lifting me up just as I swung the axe down on its shoulder. Letting out a scream, it tore the axe out, tossing it aside. Then, for some reason, it tossed me as well. I sat up, feeling bruised, to see where I struck me, and the wound was burning and flaking the dark skin. I scrambled in a panic to where my axe was. Without any rational thought, I darted off into the woods with the thing screaming, following behind. I dropped my flashlight and ran blind into the woods without any idea of what I was doing. I should have stayed on the path, but it was too late now. The thing was chasing me, wanting to kill me. It was injured, but I still didn't have much of a chance against it. I ran, feeling as if my legs would give up on me at any moment. Tears stung my eyes and branches cut my face. I still ran for Kevin's sake. The thing behind me stopped screaming, but I knew it was still after me. My heart leapt into my throat when I thought I saw something in front of me through the trees. A beam of light moving, confusing me on what it could be. Over my own breathing, I didn't hear any other noises, but my brain clicked into the fact I just saw some car headlights. I was near a road. I ran, chest threatening to burst. I tripped over a branch and rolled into the ditch along the side of the road I was so thankful for. Every muscle screamed at me as I got up and crawled out of the ditch towards the highway. It was late, but I knew it was a popular route for truckers. One would stop for me if some would just please drive by. When I stood, it felt like I twisted my ankle. I dragged my body, almost passing out from the effort. Axe still in hand, I looked up and down the road, frantic. A blow to my back tossed me, rolling into the middle of the lane. I gasped for air and stared at the monster that just kicked me aside. My axe dropped too far for me to reach it in time. It got on all fours, blood pouring from its wounded shoulder. I started in horror and I stared, knowing that this was the end and just wait for it to come for me. Yellow eyes glaring, it let out a long scream of hate at me. It dug its claws into the ground, ready to pounce. I couldn't move my ragged body and did the only thing I could think of. I screamed right back at it. Getting up on one elbow, I emptied out my lungs in a screech that made the thing not only stop from attacking me, but take a step back. We both stared each other down for a few seconds. Those few seconds might have saved my life. A blaring truck horn came from down the road. The creature looked over, seeing a transport truck coming right at it. Giving me one last look, it skittered back off into the woods. The next few hours were a muddled, frantic blur I still don't fully remember to this day. The driver stopped to get me off the road and down to the farmhouse and to a phone. He went with the farmer into the woods to check on Kevin while I stayed at the house with the farmer's wife, going between crying and sleeping. Morning came around when I woke up. Dragging my tired body to the porch, I saw emergency crews scattered on the driveway and officers going onto the trail. Someone told me Kevin was already on the way to the hospital and let me sit on a chair on the porch until another ambulance came for me. I sat watching everyone run around trying to get a search started for the missing girls and Drew. I didn't know why no officers started to question me yet. I might have looked too out of it to be any help. Someone did sit beside me to talk with me, though. I wasn't expecting so many of you to make it. Liran sat next to me, silver axe resting against the wooden rocking chair he was in. I wanted to speak, but was too tired to say anything. I'm taking this axe with me. No offense, it's too powerful to leave it with you, unless you want my job." "Pardon?" I asked, directing my head towards him, trying to see if he was joking. "Kings only last for 10 years, more if they're really strong. They need to switch bodies before it breaks down. I've been doing this job for 5, and I would like to pass the crown on to someone else. It's too tiresome. I don't know why I agreed doing this in the first place. It's also too much of a bother to set up tests and other candidates, so I'm just asked anyone who survives a supernatural encounter if they want the gig." I stared at him, not believing the words coming out of his mouth. I didn't want to come across another monster or creature of the dark ever again. Having his job was way out of the question. This guy really needed to get some standards too. He was asking a 13-year-old boy to take over such an important position. How lazy could one be? "If I could move, I would punch you for asking." I heard a small sound that was almost a laugh for him. I should have expected that answer. At least you don't need to worry about monsters bothering you again. Any king candidates are off limits. If you weren't one, you're guaranteed to be killed by something supernatural someday because you encountered some. But I refused. I started on shutting up too late. "That doesn't matter. You're still an honored human," the king recognized. "If you don't want my job, you can become a knight. It would mean you would turn into some sort of creature, but you wouldn't be under such strict rules about protecting humans as I am. Your friend Kevin accepted that offer to turn when he's 18. I shot my head up. Kevin agreed to be turned into something horrible, like those things that attacked us? Like the things that killed everyone right in front of us? My knee-jerk reaction was anger, but the reason why he would agree to such a thing came to my mind. He was hurt badly, nearly died, and powerless to help me as I risked my life to save him. He might have wanted to get some sort of strength to ensure he never felt like that again. You don't need to answer right away. Hell, you can ask to become a knight or the next king right before your death. So, just let it stay in the back of your mind." He stood up from the chair, axe over his shoulder, and stretched. "I'm leaving, and I hope I never see you again." It wasn't the nicest goodbyes, but I appreciated the thought behind it. Standing up, I was ready to talk to the cops, even though I didn't have a good story for them. I stopped when Liam looked over towards the trail and gave a small, impressed whistle. "Looks like I miscounted last night. What an embarrassing mistake." What I saw made me run past him and down the dirt driveway. Stacy was out of the trail, coming out of the trail, being guided by officers and wrapped in a blanket. She looked beat up, but still alive and walking. I didn't care about supernatural kings or knights. I only cared about going to Stacy and hugging her for fighting so hard to save us.